I don't need this safety nonsense, Cameron. Don't you know that document is mandatory?
The conference room lights hummed softly overhead, cold and bright against the polished glass walls. When Ryder Blake flicked my proposal across the conference table as if it were a paper napkin, "I don't need this safety nonsense," he announced, loud enough for the glass walls to vibrate. The room froze. A few directors stared at their notepads, clearly fighting the urge to smirk. While I stood there absorbing the slap of shock and embarrassment tightening in my throat, I didn't say a word, not yet. My silence was the only thing in the room louder than Ryder's ego. I watched him pace, waving the document like a child shaking a broken toy. He called me obsessive, dramatic, too focused on details, he added, as if that were an insult in my line of work. I kept my face steady, but inside, a quiet, bitter humor pressed upward because the pages he was ridiculing were not a side suggestion or extra paperwork. They were the federally required safety standard for the $3 billion bid he'd been bragging about for weeks. And he had no idea. Wait, if you're just watching for fun, don't leave a comment and don't subscribe. The people who really want to understand the story stay until the end. And they know what they need to do. And you know what I'm going to do next when he finally tossed it aside and moved on to belittling someone else. I felt the decision settle calmly in my chest. I picked up my notebook, nodded once to the room, and walked out. By 9:30. My resignation was submitted. No dramatic speech, no slammed doors, just an email with a subject line that said everything effective immediately. The bridge clause in our HR system meant my badge would still work for 48 hours, a minor clerical delay, one last mercy from the universe. I stepped out of the conference wing and headed toward the elevators, breathing easier with every step. As I passed the project manager for the bid, she leaned closer and whispered, "He doesn't know that document is mandatory, right?" I met her eyes, let the moment hang, and offered the smallest, driest smile I could manage. "No," I said, "he really doesn't. The quiet after a public humiliation has its own temperature, cool, strangely steady, almost numb." That was the air around me as I walked back to my desk and pulled out an old cardboard box from the bottom drawer. I didn't slam anything, didn't huff dramatically, didn't even sigh. I just started packing. My badge still blinked green on the desk beside me, waiting for the HR system to catch up. I picked up a framed photo, a few manuals, a couple of pens, and half a lifetime of notes and field reports. Funny how 20 years of crisis prevention fits in one cardboard box, I murmured to myself, letting a quiet, wry sadness settle somewhere behind my ribs. The office buzzed in its usual Monday rhythm. Phones ringing, printers humming, people pretending not to glance at me. I closed the box gently, slid the last notebook inside, and straightened up. Leaving wasn't loud. Leaving was simply leaving when I stepped into the main lobby. The automatic doors opened with that familiar hiss, a sound I'd heard 1,000 times. Today, it felt different, like the building itself exhaled in relief or regret, couldn't tell which. I walked out without looking back. As I crossed the parking lot, memories surfaced, uninvited but steady. 7 projects, 7 near disasters that had been avoided because of the proposals I'd written. I saw flashes of late nights checking load thresholds, recalculating tolerances, spotting the single pressure valve that could have failed. I remembered standing in the factory aisles years ago, running my hands along warm metal, inspecting each module so no worker would go home injured. It was quiet. Honest work, work that mattered, work Ryder would never understand. Meanwhile, on the top floor, Ryder was already telling the executive team that my departure wouldn't affect a thing. He said it with confidence, the type worn by men who believe volume makes them right. But downstairs, in HR, a clerk reviewing the personnel roster paused when she reached my file. Only one name in the company carried the Safety Integrity Tier 4 certification, mine. No backups, no substitutes, no understudies. She forwarded the information to Ryder with a short note. "We do not have another licensed signatory." His response came 30 seconds later. "We'll be fine." That was Ryder, always certain, always dismissive, always one assumption away from catastrophe. Back in my car, I set the box on the passenger seat and rested my hands on the steering wheel. There was sadness, yes, but it was quiet and clean, dignified. It came from knowing I had given years of competence to a place that never realized what it had. The numb calm wasn't emptiness, it was acceptance, and beneath it all, a faint thread of sham biem wound through the silence, soft but unmistakable. "We'll be fine," he said. "Sure." "Ryder, let's see. This part has a detail that is easy to miss. Did you catch it?" The morning after I left the company, the world felt strangely lighter. I stood in my kitchen grinding coffee beans, the slow rhythm almost therapeutic. Sunlight pushed through the blinds, warming the counter while the kettle hummed. For the first time in years, there was no meeting to rush to, no crisis waiting in my inbox, just quiet, calm, and a slight twinge of curiosity about how Ryder was surviving his first full day without someone to translate basic safety standards for him. That thought alone coaxed a faint, subtle humor out of me. But the humor sharpened when my laptop pinged with a notification from the Federal Safety Registry, the system used to verify every certified signature attached to high-value bids. The email subject line read, "Pending confirmation required for submitted proposal." Under it, a smaller line blinked Cameron Ford. No confirmation received. I stared at the screen for a moment before the irritation rolled in, slow but heavy. Then I let out a short laugh. "Because I don't work there anymore, sweetheart," I said to no one in particular. Shaking my head, the automated system had no sense of timing. But apparently, neither did Ryder. Meanwhile, at the office, the bid review portal had already stamped the company's submission with a bright red label, "Incomplete, missing certified safety approval." Not the kind of decorative marking a CEO wants on a $3 billion proposal. I imagined Ryder storming into the project room, face flushed, voice bouncing off the glass walls as he demanded to know how something so simple could be overlooked. Knowing him, he probably blamed the interns first, then IT, then fate itself. The team would have scrambled, pulling up version after version, checking document logs, audit trails, uploaded files until one of them reached the obvious conclusion: the mandatory safety certification wasn't missing by accident. It had been thrown away, literally, by Ryder. In front of the entire room. The realization must have hit them like cold water. I wasn't there to watch it unfold, but I could picture the moment perfectly, someone timidly raising a hand, reminding Ryder of the morning he'd tossed my proposal into the trash with a flourish. Irritation burned its way through me, not because they were dealing with the fallout, but because it was all so avoidable. When they finally attempted the most predictable step calling me, I didn't hear a thing. My phone sat on the living room table, face down, glowing softly with a tiny moon icon. Do not disturb. The timing couldn't have been better. If you understand the true meaning of this passage, please comment one sentence. The quiet of the late morning settled around me like a soft blanket, steady and undisturbed. When my phone began to vibrate across the kitchen counter, I almost ignored it. Spam calls had a talent for finding me at the worst times, but the number on the screen made me pause. It belonged to the lead compliance examiner for the $3 billion contract. The man wasn't known for casual conversation, I answered, keeping my voice even. "This is Cameron." There was no greeting on his end, only efficiency. "We need your final confirmation on the safety standard your company submitted." His tone carried the weight of procedure, the kind that didn't allow for mistakes. For a moment, I felt a ripple of something close to satisfaction, not vindictive joy, something calmer, more measured. The universe had simply circled back to ask the right question to the right person. I let a breath settle in my chest before responding. "I'm no longer affiliated with that company." The words came out controlled, steady, restrained, and just like that. The calm morning shifted. He exhaled sharply, not in frustration, but in recognition of what that meant. "Understood," he said. Then the line went silent for a heartbeat before he added, "We'll proceed accordingly." Proceed accordingly. I knew exactly what that implied. His department would now initiate a formal verification process, combing through the bid from top to bottom without a licensed safety officer attached. The proposal couldn't legally stand. My simple statement had activated a mechanism that no CEO tantrum or boardroom speech could override while I rinsed out my coffee mug. The real storm began brewing at headquarters. The client's review team contacted our business development office, asking politely, professionally, fatally why the designated safety lead had left the organization before final confirmation. Ryder, predictably, tried to mask his panic with forced composure. I'd seen that look before: the thin smile, the rigid jaw, the voice pitched one note higher than usual. He likely insisted everything was fully under control, even as the ground shifted beneath him. Then came the email. The compliance examiner's message was brief, factual, and devastating. It was CC'd to the entire executive board, every VP, every director, every person who had watched Ryder dismiss my work. The subject line read, "Your proposal is under suspension pending verification." A sentence with the power to freeze an entire conference room. And freeze it did. Reports later would describe the silence that followed as suffocating, the kind that clings to the walls and makes people avoid eye contact, even without being there. I could picture it perfectly, the stillness, the dread, and the slow realization settling into each face. Meanwhile, back in my kitchen, the quiet returned clean, unbothered, and deeply satisfying. Don't judge too quickly, because here comes the biggest twist. The fallout began faster than even I expected. By the time the client's suspension notice reached the board, Ryder had already summoned every senior leader into the largest conference room, slamming the door behind him with the kind of force insecure men mistake for authority. I wasn't there, of course, but several people later described the scene in perfect detail, each account confirming exactly the kind of chaos I had imagined. And somehow, knowing that made the slow burn of anger under my skin settle into something colder, sharper, almost amused. Ryder started the emergency meeting by pacing in front of the screen, barking orders and demanding someone restore the missing safety document. He spoke as if a federal certification could be reprinted like a lost parking ticket. His voice rose with each command, thick with frustration and the kind of arrogance that refuses to recognize its own reflection. He kept repeating the same line, just recreate it, as if yelling could make competence magically appear. Finally, a young engineer new enough to still believe honesty mattered lifted a trembling hand. "Sir, that's the document you threw into the trash." The room stilled. Several leaders shifted in their seats, attempting to look busy while knowing exactly what was coming. The engineer's voice cracked, but the words hung unmistakably in the air. Ryder's face tightened. First denial, then deflection. "No, that's not what happened," he snapped, before immediately pivoting to blame. Cameron was the problem, he insisted. Cameron exaggerated his role. Cameron overcomplicated simple tasks. Cameron's work never held real weight. The monologue went on, each sentence dripping with a mix of desperation and ego, revealing more than Ryder realized. I had expected irritation to take over me when I heard about it later, but instead, a biting wave of chom biem washed through. The man was flailing, drowning in a pool he insisted he owned. Then the legal team stood up, not shuffled, not muttered, stood. "Mr. Blake," the lead counsel said, "this is not optional paperwork. This is a federally mandated safety standard. Without it, the bid is not valid under procurement law." The words landed with the weight of a gavel. Every executive in that room understood implications Ryder clearly hadn't bothered to learn. And that was when the twist unfolded. Ryder, red-faced and furious, slammed his palm onto the conference table, demanding someone show him evidence of this so-called requirement. The impact activated the touch panel embedded in the desk. The screen behind him flickered once, then played the most unfortunate recording possible. The security footage of Ryder himself tossing my proposal into the trash during Monday's meeting. Silence. Heavy. Suffocating. Absolute silence. Leaders looked at one another, each expression a variation of disbelief, embarrassment, and the dawning realization that this humiliation would not be contained. Ryder froze, staring at his own ignorance projected in high definition behind him, and somewhere far from that room, hearing the story retold. I felt that blend of anger and chom biem twist together into something undeniably satisfying. If you leave here, you will miss the most important thing. The storm didn't begin with shouting, it began with the unnerving quiet that settles right before an impact. That was the atmosphere inside the boardroom when the directors summoned Ryder for an emergency session. The long mahogany table gleamed under harsh fluorescent lights, and every chair was filled with someone who had spent the past 12 hours fielding panicked calls, incomplete reports, and rumors spreading like wildfire. Tension pulsed in the air, sharp and rising, long before Ryder even walked through the door. When he finally entered, he tried to project confidence, but the strain showed around his eyes. The chairman folded his hands and got straight to the point. Ryder, we need a full update on the $3 billion contract. His tone was clipped, neutral, but unmistakably cold. Ryder cleared his throat and launched into a rehearsed speech. He claimed the situation was under control, that minor delays were being resolved, and that the client's requests were routine procedural clarifications. The more he spoke, the more the board exchanged skeptical glances. Beneath the polished surface of his words, a collapse was already taking shape, one that everyone could sense except the man still clinging desperately to authority. Then it happened. The board secretary's laptop chimed, a single notification, small and unassuming, but the sound cut through Ryder's monologue like a blade. She opened the email, her expression shifting instantly from confusion to dread. "This is from the client," she whispered, voice trembling just enough for the entire room to hear. "What does it say?" the chairman asked. Her eyes moved slowly across the screen. Then she read aloud, "Your bid has been placed on hold due to missing certified safety verification." The room froze. Breath caught, shoulders stiffened. Every executive felt the floor drop beneath them. A $3 billion opportunity paused, possibly lost because of one missing certified signature, because of one decision made in arrogance, because of one CEO who thought he was untouchable. Ryder went pale. For the first time, there was no bluster, no bravado, no attempt to spin the narrative, just helplessness settling over him like a weight he could no longer push away. His career, his reputation, the illusion of control he'd clung to, all of it began cracking in real time, in a shaky attempt to regain footing. He grabbed his phone and stepped aside. "I'll call Cameron," he muttered. He'll understand. Maybe we can fix this." He dialed my number with frantic determination. Pacing across the boardroom carpet, I didn't answer. Instead, I sent one message, 11 words, perfectly clear, perfectly timed, "Sir. You said you didn't need this?" The boardroom remained silent long after the notification chimed on Ryder's screen. The storm had finally hit, and there was no escape left for him. This section is not for the casual viewer, if you are unsure. Do not continue. The official announcement came on a gray Thursday morning, the kind where the sky hangs low and everything feels heavier than it should. I was sitting at my kitchen table, scrolling through headlines, when the client released the list of companies advancing to the final round of the $3 billion contract. I didn't need to search for Ryder's company. The absence of their name was louder than any rejection notice, cold, precise justice delivered in a single posted document. I stared at it for a moment, letting the quiet triumph settle, not explosive, not vengeful, just clean and inevitable. Meanwhile, across town, the business development floor reportedly fell silent, not the focused kind of silence, but the stunned, oxygen vacuum kind. Reps stopped mid-sentence, managers froze over spreadsheets. One analyst dropped her pen, the soft clatter echoing through the room like a funeral bell. They had all known the bid was critical. They had not known the collapse would be this absolute. Irony has a sharp edge when it arrives so plainly. Ryder, in full panic mode, started dialing every contact he had at the client organization. He left voicemails, sent emails, forwarded lengthy explanations. The usual flailing dressed up as professionalism. I imagine him pacing his office, trying to stitch together a recovery that no longer existed. By mid-afternoon, someone finally responded, but not with the answer he hoped for. The message was brutally simple. Without the certified safety officer, your data cannot be trusted. No apology, no room for negotiation, no invitation to clarify. Just the legal truth stated with surgical efficiency. It takes years to build credibility in federal contracting and 4 seconds of an email to lose it entirely. Ryder must have read that line over and over, trying to find a loophole, a nuance, anything to save face. But cold justice doesn't come with escape hatches. As the rejection rippled inward, people began forwarding the notice through internal channels, quietly at first, then less quietly. Departments that had spent months preparing for the bid watched their work evaporate. Logistics, operations, finance, every corner of the company felt the blow. $3 billion gone because the man at the top couldn't distinguish arrogance from expertise. And then came the twist that tied everything together with a bow of irony. One of their biggest competitors posted a short, cheerful message on a private industry forum. "Thanks for the easy round. No names mentioned, no details needed. Everyone understood exactly who the message was for. I closed my laptop and leaned back in my chair, the quiet triumph settling deeper. I hadn't sabotaged anything. I hadn't plotted revenge. I had simply walked away and nature had taken its course. Cold justice, delivered exactly on time. The unraveling of a man's power rarely happens in one dramatic moment. It happens in waves. Each one hits harder, louder, and messier than the last. That was the case with Ryder Blake. By the time the contract collapse became public inside the company, he was already storming through the halls, red-faced and unhinged, searching desperately for anyone to blame. Reports later described him shouting at managers, accusing engineers, scolding assistants, and even berating the front desk staff as though they were personally responsible for the missing safety certification. His anger wasn't controlled anymore. It was frantic, sloppy, and unmistakably panicked. What he didn't realize was that the walls had ears, and the ears had group chats. It didn't take long for whispers to spread. The CEO threw out the mandatory safety document, first spoken quietly between two analysts in the break room, then repeated in elevators, then shared in long message threads late into the night. Employees had seen the footage. They had watched the email chain. They knew exactly who caused the collapse by mid-morning. The phrase self-inflicted disaster was circulating through internal channels faster than any official communication could be written. Then the leaks started. No one ever figured out exactly who forwarded an internal report to the communications department, detailing Ryder's act of tossing the federally required safety standard into the trash. The document spread across internal message boards before leadership could pull it down. Screenshots flew across group chats. Managers received it from their subordinates, directors received it from other directors, and inevitably, investors received it from someone trying to be helpful. Panic hit the stock price like a hammer. Shares dipped, then plunged. It wasn't catastrophic bankruptcy territory, not yet, but it was enough to send the board into a scramble. Departments paused projects, finance froze spending, HR began drafting contingency plans. Every corridor in the building buzzed with fear, frustration, and a dawning realization the company's downfall wasn't an accident. It had a name: Ryder's. The communications team called an emergency session with him, urging restraint. They advised that he issue a calm public statement, accept responsibility, and temporarily step down until the crisis stabilized. He refused, then argued, then snapped at the one person trying to save his reputation. His desperation had taken full control, leaving only anger where judgment should have been. Still, the panic rose. By late afternoon, the board was quietly discussing interim leadership. Investors demanded explanations. Analysts pressed for clarity, and employees watched the chaos unfold with a mix of dread and grim vindication. After all, many had been in that room when Ryder dismissed the mandatory safety standard. Now the world knew too. Then came the twist I never expected. A senior executive, one who had rarely acknowledged me beyond polite nods when I still worked there, sent a discreet message to my personal email. The subject line was simple: need guidance. In the body, he wrote that the board was considering a full internal audit and asked if I could offer insight into how they might stabilize the safety program. I stared at the message for a long moment. Ryder was free-falling, and his own leadership team was already reaching past him for me. If you really look deeply, you will realize it. The invitation arrived on a quiet afternoon, tucked between two mundane emails about utilities and a software update I kept ignoring. The sender's name made me sit up straighter, the lead compliance examiner from the $3 billion contract. The subject line was even simpler: consultancy request. When I opened it, the message was direct and formal, but the meaning beneath it carried weight. They wanted me to serve as a safety integrity consultant for their independent evaluation panel. No politics, no backdoor maneuvering, a clean, lawful invitation extended because they needed someone they could trust. For a long moment, I let the silence settle around me. There was no triumphal drumbeat in my chest, no gloating smile, just a steady sense of resolution. After everything that had happened, after the dismissal and the fallout, being asked to return in this capacity didn't feel like vengeance. It felt like dignity finding its way back home. I replied with equal clarity, I accept. The first internal evaluation meeting took place in a glass-paneled conference room at the client's headquarters. The environment was bright, organized, calm, everything Ryder's boardroom hadn't been. I sat among engineers, auditors, and analysts as they distributed the binders of documentation submitted by each bidding company when they handed me the binder from my former employer. I didn't hesitate. I opened it, flipped through the pages, and evaluated each section with the same professionalism I'd always upheld. There was no bitterness in the process, no desire to twist the knife or embellish a flaw. Their submission spoke for itself: thin documentation, missing verifications, unverified safety claims, and the glaring absence of certified oversight. I didn't need to punish them. All I had to do was apply the standards they had once mocked. As the panel reviewed the findings, a large monitor lit up with the virtual feed from the companies awaiting the results. Faces filled the grid: executives, managers, team leads. And then I saw him. Ryder Blake. His expression was rigid at first, professionally blank, until his eyes drifted toward the small window in the corner where the panelists appeared. The moment he recognized me, his face drained. A full, visible collapse of composure. He blinked once, twice, as if hoping the image might flicker away. It didn't. I didn't look away. I didn't smile. I simply sat there, calm and steady, an unspoken reminder that competence has a long memory. When the panel chair finally spoke, her voice was neutral but firm. Based on our review, this submission does not meet the minimum safety requirements for consideration. No drama, no extended explanation, just the truth, delivered with precision. Ryder's shoulders sagged. The other executives beside him stared at their screens, stiff and silent. As the meeting ended, one of the examiners turned to me. "Thank you for your clarity," she said. I nodded, not out of pride, but out of something quieter, a grounded sense of power that didn't need to shout. The reckoning wasn't loud or cruel. It was simply the natural outcome of truth being allowed to stand. This detail has appeared once before. Smart viewers will remember. The first morning at my new job felt different in a way I hadn't expected: quiet, steady, almost weightless. There was no tension in my shoulders, no guarded glances across a conference table, no sense of being tolerated rather than valued. Instead, when I walked into the operations wing of the client's headquarters, people actually rose from their desks to greet me, not out of obligation, not because someone whispered my title, just genuine respect. It struck me harder than I let on, after years spent fighting to justify my existence under Ryder's leadership. Real recognition felt like a small rebirth all its own. The younger engineers were the first to approach. Some had read my audits, others had studied my old safety proposals like case studies. One of them, barely a year out of school, told me he'd chosen this field because of a talk I'd given at a technical summit ages ago. I wasn't sure what to say to that. Praise wasn't something I had ever been trained to receive, so I nodded, thanked him, and tried to absorb the strange warmth of being seen not as a burden, not as an obstacle, but as a standard worth learning from. As days turned into weeks, my role expanded naturally. Meetings were thoughtful, discussions were balanced, and disagreements were professional rather than personal. It felt healthy, and in that newfound calm. I found myself driving past my old company one Thursday afternoon. Curiosity, not nostalgia, pulled me toward the familiar building. The sight stunned me more than I expected. 2 entire floors, the ones that used to glow late into the night with engineering work, were now dark, windows covered, lights stripped out to save on costs, a quiet casualty of the collapse Ryder never saw coming. I stood there for a moment, hands in my pockets, breathing in a feeling that wasn't quite satisfaction and wasn't quite sadness, something gentler, something honest. Funny how one piece of paper can reveal everyone's true competence, I murmured to myself. Not as a jab, just an observation carved from experience. The true turning point came a week later. I was reviewing a structural safety sequence when the head of the client's executive team walked into the room, carrying a folder embossed with a silver insignia. He closed the door, sat across from me, and placed the folder gently on the table. "We've been watching your work," he said. "The clarity, the integrity, the leadership." He slid the folder toward me. "We'd like you to lead the entire safety strategy for the full $3 billion project." For a moment, I didn't move, not from shock, but from a deep, grounding awareness that everything, every insult, every dismissal, every moment of silence I'd swallowed had brought me exactly here when I finally opened the folder. My name sat at the top in bold lead: Safety Director. No fireworks, no dramatic music, just a quiet, steady sense of justice fulfilled. Rebirth doesn't always announce itself. Sometimes it arrives gently, placing a new path in front of you and trusting you to walk it with dignity. And I did. I realized the real victory wasn't the collapse of a contract, it was reclaiming my own worth. Sometimes life doesn't give you applause, it gives you a doorway, and you have to be brave enough to walk through it. If my story resonated with you, tell me, where are you listening from right now? And hey, if you felt that quiet fire in this journey, leave a comment, tap like, share it with someone who needs it, and don't forget to subscribe. Your support keeps these stories alive.